We will begin in 1 minute.
Well, I've had it where one. They're so
Welcome, everybody, to the Traverse City Planning Commission study session today, Tuesday, September 17th, in this beautiful, still summer weather that I know we are all still happy about. So, as always, we will begin with the land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. Do we need to take a roll call vote?
Yeah, you can do a roll call.
Okay.
Commissioner Deturi?
Here.
Commissioner Heller?
Here.
Commissioner Hershey?
Here.
Commissioner Knapp?
Here.
Commissioner O'Brien?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Swanson we know is not going to be here, and we'll see if Commissioners McGillivray and Treadwell show up.
Thank you. Are there any announcements? Anyone have any announcements? Okay, so we will move on to our first topic of discussion, the Master Plan, Action Plan Prioritization Questionnaire and discussion. I once again just want to thank everybody who's sitting here and who came before us for the 2-year process to write this master plan. And so now we get to the more interesting part and fun part, which is prioritizing and creating our goals. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Leslie Sichterman.
Thank you. So let me also congratulate you all. It's a big deal to get a master plan done, so good job all. And now we have to do what the master plan told us to do and start updating some documents and ordinances and start to implement the plan. So if you've spent some time with the master plan, you know that the magazine portion of the plan includes an action plan. There are a lot of things on the action plan that are not the direct purview of the Planning Commission. There are other parties responsible for getting those actions undertaken. And some of the items, or all of the items, do have kind of a timeline associated with them, but it's not hard and fast in the master plan with a to-do list that's all prioritized. So Sean asked me to kind of lead a discussion and try to help you find a way to prioritize these items that are the purview of the Planning Commission. Being kind of an analytical person, I sent you all a questionnaire. I guess my thought was to help you look at different decision-making criteria and apply them to each of these 13 items in a way that helps you to not overemphasize something that you might have a sweet spot for, or something you really don't want to tackle. And it just makes it a little bit more academic, a little bit less emotional, in my own opinion. So thank you. I think we had pretty much everyone do this little questionnaire, and what I asked you to do was to look at these 13 tasks and answer these 5 questions for each one, and they're all like a rating 1 to 5. So the 5 questions were, how does the master plan's action plan prioritize the item? You know, does it say we should do it in the immediate term, or is it pushed back a little bit further? What is the relative cost associated with the item? And this is both monetary and kind of like time commitment. How much political and community support is there associated with the item? And then does it also comply with or coincide with other adopted plans and policies, directives, or anything kind of already brewing within the city that is recognized or not, and or formalized or not? And does it also represent an item that's going to take a lot of, that is very complex and might take a lot of time or coordination, or might just be the only thing you work on for a while? Is it something that's going to take a lot of resources to get done? So I also, again, just from my my perspective, added weights to all of these answers, these criteria. The highest one being that first one about the master plan's prioritizing. So I gave that the most weight. A couple of the other things had a smaller weight. You can see on this little table on the left down at the bottom what those weights are. I can make that a little bigger if you can't see that.
Please.
But it goes from 0.4 or 40% of the weight is that first one, the prioritizing in the master plan already. 10% for relative cost, 20% for political and community support, 10% for other coinciding with other recognized objectives and strategies, and then 20% the complexity of that item. I know that I kind of, you know, might not be representing what everybody else thinks those weights should be. So I've sort of set this up. Oh, and based on all of the answers that we have received, the highest priority items end up being item number 3, task number 3, which is the riparian buffer zone, and item number 1, which is vacation home rental, updating the standards for that. Those kind of rose to the top. Of course, the master plan also said that those are something that should happen soon, and they're both kind of in the works. So I thought, gosh, maybe that does overweight those 2 items. So I went ahead, and we can do these on the fly and change these numbers, but I changed the weights to just totally take out any weight associated with what the master plan currently says, and have rejiggered the rest of them. And like I said, I can change them to whatever you want. I don't think we need to keep changing these until we come up with an answer we like, but I think if there's something that there's clear consensus on what these weights should be, we can change them right now and see what comes out on top. But I ended up in this second scenario, which was a little bit randomized, giving a lot of weight to, you know, the strategies, objectives that are already recognized, that already support this item, and also relative cost. Those have more emphasis, and again, totally took out the what the current action plan says. So I guess I'll open it up to all of you, find out if this has any value to you, and if you would like to change those weights and run a second scenario.
So,
Deb, did you want to recognize
oh,
people?
I'm
or
sorry.
did you wanna-
Jackie.
Just fine.
Go
I
ahead.
just thought I had, Leslie was really helpful to me in answering a few questions before I filled out the survey. And one of the things that was helpful was understanding the 13 that we were evaluating as opposed to the list of 35 that appeared in the action plan. So I thought maybe for benefit of the public, and if anyone didn't inquire about that, if you could.
Sure, I do have, if you want to take a peek at it, I have the entire list, which is much longer. But again, a lot of those, the master plan, and just the nature of those items are such that they're not part of what the Planning Commission does. Some of them call for change in policy or change in procedures that would happen at a different level, whether it's at the City Commission level, staff level, or it might be something that the clerk's office might take up, or it might be a combination, or even something that is kind of relegated to engineering or the DDA. So these are the ones that we have most direct control over at this level. So, and even some of these, I would argue, may not be. Once we decide on these weights, see kind of what comes up to the top, I thought we could see if, say, there's 2 or 3 things that come out as a high priority, we can look at those items. Can they physically be done all within the same time frame? And are any of them some of the ones that might be questionable that may not even be something you want to take up? And in looking at the individual answers, I don't want to like single out anybody, but there are some where there's some outliers, where most people have kind of the same score for certain items, and then there's 1 or 2 people that give it a really low score. Maybe we want to hear from those folks and just find out why that earned a lower score, and if there's something that you want to share with the rest of the group that might impact making a decision about prioritizing that particular item. So I'm prepared to change these numbers. And I think it works as long as we continue to have it add up to 1 or 100%. Any thoughts?
I personally lean towards scenario 2. I think, there's strength in numbers. If there's already been some vetting process with other departments and adopted plans, I think we've already got the ball rolling on some of those items that we can lean on other departments and resources and staff and budgets to accomplish those goals. So for that reason, and kind of the costs associated with it, I'm leaning towards scenario 2 in terms of the weighting.
But shouldn't we at least have a little bit in there for the first one? For how does I have an eye doctor appointment next week. I'm so sorry. But how
It's
does the
kinda small,
master
sorry.
plan's action plan prioritize the item?
Why did it go from 40
Yeah,
to
shouldn't it just
0?
at least have like 0.1 or something? Like, I don't know why it went to
Yeah.
full 0.
I do think she was looking to see if it like completely changed
How it
the
impacted it?
results.
Okay.
And it did a little bit.
So, and I'll show you, we can change this to 10, let's say. Now we've got, and you can see this real-time changes these numbers.
So the
But
then we
we'll
have to knock one
take
down.
out,
40 might go to 30.
maybe this one becomes 3. And so then this is what we come up with. And, seems like when you take out or lessen the impact of the master plan prioritizing, what I've noticed is that 1 and 3, which are riparian and short-term rental, still come out pretty high. And then some of the ones like number 8 tends to come up high, and it does here as well. But all of these seem to be pretty on par. I would say, 4 through 8 are pretty close. And item two is pretty high up here, too. That is the, the whole discussion about opening up the discussion again about housing, allowing triplexes, quadplexes, ADUs, and looking at the R2 zoning district. I'd venture to say, that one, especially in addition with short-term rental and riparian, could be too much to chew on all at once. So, if you like this weighting and you want to go on now to just look at these individual projects and see which ones that get high scores should happen immediately and which would happen second after those kind of get resolved, I think that could kind of get us pretty far tonight. Again, this is a study session, so I think we'll just have a discussion, not necessarily take any direct action on it. And I can come back at your next meeting with taking the feedback we get tonight, consolidating it, and seeing after you've slept on it for a month if that still seems to make sense.
There's a scenario that I'd be interested in just taking a look at, and that would be, what would happen if you just, from the original weightings, transposed the time frame and the community/political support? So time frame became 20 and the support became 40. Would that, I'm curious.
So this would be 10.
Yeah, I think you have to change them all.
This would be 20. Oh, this would be 40. And then this would be 10 and 20. So, yeah, it's actually very close to the original,
Yeah. Thank you.
which is pretty interesting.
I thought it would be enlightening.
Yeah.
Because I agree that from my own perspective, I think, I'm a fan of doing what's easy first. And if it's low-hanging fruit, there's wide support for something, I think that's easier to take on.
Some of
So
it we've already started.
Yeah, so I kind of like the idea of having a lot of weight for community support.
What concerns me a little bit about, question, is it 36? Does it coincide with adopted plans, policies, directives, or recognized city strategies, objectives? I don't know about the rest of you. Some of the times, I just didn't know. And so that's part of my question. The other part of my question is that, of course, this could change over time. I mean, the city commission's going to engage in a strategic plan that's going on for like 6 months. We don't know what kind of goals are going to come out of that at the moment that are going to align with ours. So it could change over time. So I like, did you change it to 10? I don't see it anymore. But
Yeah,
I kind of like changing it to 10 because, A, I didn't know a lot of the answers to that. I don't know how about the rest of you felt. And B, it could change over time.
mm-hmm.
But then we can adjust if it changes over time,
Right,
too. It's not-
especially because the city commission will soon be undertaking their strategic plan, and that might
Change that.
impact that
Yeah.
as well.
Right. So I kind of like leaving that at 10 because it's such an unknown. But what does everybody else think?
I think if you give me one of these goals, I can go into the city's library of adopted policies, plans. We're not talking a couple shelves here that they've adopted over the last 10 or 15 years. And I can pretty much find a policy or adopted plan
For
that
everything,
supports
right?
everything in here.
Yeah.
So, and like another question that I struggled with was, the cost question. That's really a question for staff on whether or not you need more, what the cost and involvement is. And then the other part was a question about is it in line with the administration? I don't know if it's in line with the administration. I don't even know who you mean by the administration. So I find it interesting, though, because it is all, no matter how you change it, some things are
Similar.
pretty much closer to the top.
Because I think cost was also cost in time, too, and not just dollars.
Well, that part I understand. And it's also, yeah, the complexity. I mean, I
Yeah.
understand the low-hanging fruit. And I don't, you know, and I guess, but again, I think that's what I want to hear from staff. If you pick low-hanging fruit, what's your top 3 picks? What are the 3 easiest things to get done?
You know, I haven't spent a lot, I have to tell you, I haven't spent a lot of time studying these 13 items because, again, I wanted to not be swayed by the actual things, you know, but I want to see what your scoring was like. But I think a couple of them that are sort of a straightforward zoning change where it's fairly clear that it's sort of a cleanup thing. I think those I would go after first and just get them off the list.
Oh, you're talking 8 and 9?
I'm kind of thinking 8 and 9. I don't think there's a little ambiguity, but I think overall there's pretty broad agreement on those.
And also 3, because it's already in process.
Well, that was something I was going to bring up, actually. The one thing that I struggle with is if you eliminate 1 and 2, which are kind of in the process of being worked on, it's pretty, like, everything's a priority, it looks like. And if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Right.
So it's like, I don't know. Just something that goes through my mind is like, yeah, those 2 are the lowest hanging fruit because they're already being worked on.
Yeah.
And I put more priority on number 3 because I want to see it finished. And number 1, I want to see it finished. Like, I want to see us follow through with that.
I did too.
But if I hadn't thought that way, would it have changed things a little bit? Probably number 2 for me would have been the highest priority.
And the other thing I wanted to ask is, when we looked these up in the master plan document, many of them are 1 to 3 years. A few were 3 to 5 years. So when we're talking about prioritizing this, are we supposed to pick some for year 1, some for year 2, some for year 3? Is that how you want us to do it?
Well, I think the master plan gives you year spans.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is that I would prioritize, like, these things happen first and then these things, because some of those things might take you a year or 2 years. There might be things that come up that there might be a big development project that comes before the planning commission that takes a lot of time. And, you know, these might have to be held off. So even though it's good to have some kind of, you know, time frame to keep you on your toes and keep you moving forward, I think the reality is that, you know, just prioritizing and saying, let's do these 2 things, finish them, or get them to a point where they're, you know, close to being done, and then we can start on the next thing.
Kind of begs the question about our capacity as a group, and how much do we feel we can tackle realistically? I mean, do we choose, you know, a few big, hairy, audacious goals, and in addition to some low-hanging fruit, you know, do we try to balance our workload that way? Do we tackle the really big ones by dividing and conquering, you know, the way we're approaching the riparian to have a subcommittee? So, you know, I think there are some other organizational things we could talk about as we try to establish priorities. Think about how would we go about it?
Yeah, like originally we had talked about, for number 1, having a committee, have that worked on through a committee. But we also have number 3 currently working on through committee. So I totally agree. And in my personal opinion, I think we should have no more than probably 1 or 2 committees at a time. It just feels like it could get really hairy, it could be a lot on staff. That really it separates the board, like in a good way, you have different opinions on each of those, and it just limits, I think it would limit report backs, I think it would limit like the way that we could all work together on those, because they'd be competing for study session updates, or that's just what I'm envisioning. So I think, yeah, you tackle one big one and a couple of the little ones that feel attainable. Like, the one that really excited me is 14th Street, wherever it is.
Number
10.
10.
I feel like that is super attainable. I feel like it's long overdue. That anytime I drive through that area, it is like sad city. So I think that was one that I know excited me.
And it's fairly high up on the,
Yeah, and it was in the middle ground of 8, 9, 10. They were all kind of tied.
One thing for, like, a question for you, Anna. What are your, like, smaller ones? Would you think of as smaller?
Yeah, that's interesting. So the ones that we did kind of just talk about are smaller to me. So 8, 9 for sure.
Yeah.
10, 12-ish. 12 is like medium to me. I think those were and maybe 5. Nope, also 6. So like a decent chunk
Okay.
of them.
'Cause-
Like 5 and 6 were like, okay, somebody would do one, like staff would do one report,
Yeah.
come back to us, and we could start moving on it. That's what I was thinking was small, was like a single meeting worth of a report from staff.
Yeah.
And we do our research, and then we come back.
I guess for me, I would include number 3 because, again, it's already, we're in the process of working on it. So I feel like we've got time into it, and we probably have, I don't know, I mean, Leslie would know better than me how much more time we have to work on it. So, like, I just would think of it as a smaller one, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
In my brain, I was thinking of it not,
Okay.
because I think there's the whole educational aspect piece that we talked about being pretty important
Yeah.
for that. And I think that would need to happen around some sort of waterfront or seasonal time of year
Okay.
for the educational aspect, so that people can get on the waterfront to see what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I guess if we don't have a winter, we could do it. But otherwise, I was already thinking about spring.
Yeah, okay.
And so that made it not small to me.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll jump in here. So, yeah, I mean, I understand what you say about 6. If we just do 6, it's really good. But all we're doing at that point is stopping there at the evaluation, the way this is written.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so then it becomes, if they're not in the proper zoning districts, what do we do? And how do you
Yeah.
address it? So it's like, what's the next step? I think I look at some of these, when I look at the difficulty of them, it's going to be a public participation with some of these, and which ones are going to draw the most ire from the public. So I think, rezoning West Front to C4A, that's going to be, the actual actions of doing that is going to involve a lot of, and you've got to ask whether or not it's going to get through the city commission, if it's going to have support for that, and that's all going to be a long process. I just think it's a longer process than some of the other ones. 300 and 400 block, 500 blocks of South Union Street, that's been talked about for over a year. We were talking about that when I was on the planning commission, so we've been talking about it for 3 or 4 years. It's not coming as a surprise to anyone. And it's not drawn a whole lot of, it's drawn some objections from the community, but people weren't shouting us down. It
I'm
just
sorry,
makes
was that
sense. It's
number
just-
8?
Yeah.
number 8.
Yeah, number 8. And,
Yeah, we did
so I'm surprised 7 grew up so high. I mean, because that'd be like my favorite, but it's not an easy task because you're talking about,
Or is it
And-
clearly defined
Yeah.
even?
yeah, well, it's talking about rewriting the zoning ordinance is really what they're saying, you're saying in that. And I think we should be starting that, but do we need to start that, right away? Yeah, we can start, but then that's a whole process about just having a discussion about how you want to approach that.
Chapter by chapter or, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one, and I think it's in the 5 to 7 years or
What do you think
something.
about 10? Because Anna was in favor of 10. and
I think
saw-
10's I
saw a
think
lot of heads
10's
nodding.
Development districts are different than the more commercial districts, and we tend to make them more, when we did the development district along 8th Street, we made it more of a, more public and more involvement.
Wasn't that
with-
the Envision 8? Was that the
Yeah.
Envision 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, so there was more, and we kind of tweaked it to make it fit better with what people were looking for. So what the business owners on 8th were looking for, and what the neighborhoods were looking for. And no one walked away happy. So
So I
it
think
was a
it's
rousing success.
That's when you know you succeed.
Yeah, and no one's complaining about it today.
Yeah.
And I think that still took a year-ish,
Yeah, it's
right?
not
Yeah,
an
yeah.
easy.
And it
None
was
of
a
these
lot
are
of public
easy.
engagement, lots
Yeah,
of
it
public
was.
engagement.
I mean, I think
Yes.
1 and 3, we've started them, we just continue on those, and then, you start looking at staff time and how those go, and where we're gonna go with those. That's kind of my thought. I don't know if there's another, even those, they're not easy ones. They're all gonna involve time and research, and staff time. But I think, it took us a while, but I'll say this also, it also depends, the length of time it takes depends on what else is coming before us.
That's
If
right.
we have a lot of projects coming before us, then it doesn't really work.
Yeah, so we're preliminarily picking these.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're going to have to go to the side if something else more
But-
pertinent or with more time sensitive comes before us, or like something that a grant requires or something like that may happen down the road.
But we also have more staff. So,
Yeah, exactly.
and so
So-
they could, a lot of times in the past, we only had one planning director.
Right, right.
And that was one a professional planning person. It slowed us down.
Yeah.
Just curious, I mean, it sounds as though we're trying to anticipate community support to a certain extent. Back to Leslie's chart, what happens if you weight that community support 100% and take away weightings for all the other factors? Would that show us anything different?
Well,
I'm just curious.
100% probably would. Right now, it's weighted as,
Also, that is our perception of
Well, yes,
public.
you're right.
right now, it's
Public.
40%.
Absolutely right.
That's,
I mean,
yeah,
if you
that's
w-
the
if you
thing.
weigh
That's
it
the hardest
100%,
part.
Yeah, it's right,
Yeah.
they're going to change everything.
Why is it, oh, I know why. Just to see, because we can.
Now,
So,
I would argue,
sorry.
Kind of accentuated the
yeah, the
existing.
two that we already
yeah,
have.
Yeah.
And based on some of the riparian buffer meetings,
Yeah.
I just don't feel that vibe.
No, I don't either.
So that's really interesting to me.
You don't feel a lot of public support for it?
No.
I mean, there were probably, so at the last meeting, there were probably 4 people in the audience.
Yeah.
Split down the middle, but the 2 that were against were very strong.
I think that comes from an education standpoint, though. Those two probably,
And
and
they had ownership of land.
yeah. And I
Exactly,
think they don't understand that it's you're grandfathered in, like, and I
Yeah.
actually had to I emailed Leslie afterwards too, and it's like, only when you build something does it kick in. So, like, that's just an education thing, I
Yeah,
think.
so maybe that's what I'm,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even with this new weight, number 10 is still fairly high.
Yeah,
So,
is that 14th?
yes.
to me, again, it's like you eliminate 1 and 2, and it's still pretty level in my mind. I'm like, it's, they're pretty close
10
still.
and 11 are higher than everything else,
Sure.
like, other than 1 and 2.
Maybe there's even one more way of looking at workload, trying to be realistic for what we can accomplish. Are any of these clearly going to require outside resources? I mean, like I look at design standards, for instance. Well, obviously, that's going to require a lot of input from outside experts. Are there others here that we should be thinking of as primarily we delegate the work out to the subject matter experts, and our time is just an input and review and direct?
So the ones that I weighted highest for that, if I'm remembering correctly, were like 5, 6, 11, maybe not 6, but anything that said, no, I'm sorry, 4 and 5. Electric vehicles for sure. I was like, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Anything.
And I mean, and I am an owner of an electric vehicle, and I don't feel like I can make that decision. And then 11. I think those were my top 3 for like needing some, we need to research, and I think they're going to be, it will take time and research for those.
Our personal research or
No,
Bringing
staff
in-
research quite a bit. I think our personal on top of it, but I was mostly thinking about staff research and like standards and just, yeah, municipal standards. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and those are both questionable just the way they're written. So when it says consider electric vehicle infrastructure and private site plan approval process, I'm assuming that means mandate, which is almost the same as 5, which is create zoning standards for, electrical vehicle.
So the way I read it was 1 is for the structures for charging devices and 1 was for parking. So I read 4 as require
Oh.
properties to actually put in the infrastructure for charging units. And I read purely 5 as like, if they have 4, how much should we be planning for in terms of spaces? But that was
They're
just
kind of like the
the
same
way
thing.
I read it, yeah.
They're really a twofer.
Yeah, they
If
for
you
sure
knock
are.
off one, you're knocking off the other.
That's right.
I agree.
So if we want to look really good, we should take that one on right off the bat. Get a twofer, get them knocked off. And, it'll be easy because as soon as the things change, they'll come back, engineers will complain and they'll come back to us and tell us we need to change our standards or update them. So, yeah, that works. That's probably the easiest one. We just get the city commission to contract with somebody to provide us the standards that we should be adopting.
Well, let's look at, because we've talked a lot about 1, because that's happening. 3 is happening. So, I mean, it's happening. So those have to be 2 of ours because the work has to continue. There seemed to be a lot of love for 10. I saw lots of heads shaking. So are we happy with 1, 3, and 10 and maybe adding 1 more for fun? Yes?
Can I make a pitch for one that might possibly be added that I don't think is yet on the radar at all, but it may be a 2-fer or a 3-fer. But the idea of focusing in some way on low-income, ultra-low-income, affordable workforce housing. I know during last year's zoning efforts, it was specifically, that was not part of the package. And I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do, even if it's just setting quantitative goals for, working with the Housing North data and setting, objectives for ourselves as a city to say, we hope by, 3 years from now that we will have X number of additional ultra-low-income units.
So does that align with number 2 in your mind?
Seems like it's tied into 2. They
Yeah,
could be tied into 2.
I thought it was tied into 2, and then also,
7?
Yeah, and there were some that didn't even get on the top 13 list that I
Also
thought
maybe
were
12?
connected. Yeah, possibly 12.
Maybe.
The only part about that is like we have to stick within the very small scope of planning. So like even, and a huge chunk of that, in my opinion, comes from like pilots and comes from different funding mechanisms. So if we take on the part that is planning and land use, then that would make sense.
Yeah.
And maybe if there's a bite or appetite for the funding part, it could work pretty organically, I think.
Or maybe get picked up on the strategic plan side.
Could we possibly change or add to the language in number 2 that says with a specific focus on affordable and workforce housing? And that would tie that into that?
Which
Number
was that?
2,
On 2.
adding with a specific focus on affordable and workforce housing. I mean, we could even call it affordable, attainable, and workforce housing. There's those 3. Yes.
The question becomes, as soon as you do that, and this is just from past history, and maybe I'm wrong, but in the past, we've been told you cannot consider who's going to live in a housing unit. It doesn't matter who's going to live there. Your goal is to plan housing units or allow housing units and not be biased in one direction or the other. So when you start asking about that, how do you accomplish that? And the one key thing about making things more affordable is that do you have a different building standard or site plan standard if it's going to be affordable? That's a legal question that you have to get answered, whether or not you could actually do that. If we can do it, then that's a whole new avenue that's opened up to us that we should consider.
Yeah, 'cause
But
when
if
you-
it's not allowed, then all you can do is basically say the whole question of affordability comes down to price and cost, not.
And
Well, I would say that that's where we can have some opportunity there. We're not, if we're saying, okay, we want to develop more or allow more ADUs, triplexes, quadplexes, whatever, but the focus is going to be on them being available at lower price points, then that doesn't, we're not mandating that the newly developed ones would have to be in that price point, but it would have a set of standards and parts of town and criteria that we're looking at. And we're not then tying ourselves or the city to looking at income-based criteria for the incoming residents. You could be a multimillionaire that decides that you're going to live in a 300 square foot ADU. But that's less likely to happen than
But we allow 300 square foot ADUs already. And I understand allowing more density allows more housing, reduces land costs. And that's about the only thing
And
you
yeah, if
can
the
do.
focus is on, say, smaller size units with less amenities, then those will, almost by necessity, be lower price point and cater to workforce and
Well, and
affordable.
I don't disagree with that. I understand what you're saying. I'm saying, practically speaking, the question is can we legally target zoning to try and, to give advantages through zoning to something that's targeted for workforce housing? That's my question.
So I have a couple of thoughts. One is that generally zoning speaks to form, location, size, density, and for instance, you can never zone for ownership, like rental versus homeowner. But that doesn't mean that a lot of zoning ordinances don't have provisions that, for instance, give you more density or give you PUD approval or some discretionary approval. If you meet certain standards, some of those can be that a portion of a development's units are set aside for those earning under 30% area median income or 50 or 80 or whatever that goal might be that you write into zoning. So in a roundabout way, it can be incorporated in zoning. But, you know, I think it's part of a bigger picture that would have to, you know, ideally hit on lots of different things that can help to support more affordable housing. Because, you know, you could write that kind of thing in your ordinance to give a preference or give, say, increased density to those developments with a portion that's affordable, and yet nobody may take you up on it. So it's there, you've allowed the opportunity, but maybe you didn't sweeten the pot as well, or it's just that the developers that would be developing there are not also affordable housing developers, and, you know, it just doesn't come together the right way.
Oh, so you're saying we can offer a density bonus?
Yep.
For, so that's
Yep,
interesting.
that's done pretty
So it's-
often, and I
okay.
think, you know, I don't know of any reason off the top of my head that couldn't work here. But one thing I'll quickly also kind of throw out there, and I think it's for a larger housing discussion that we might have at a future meeting. But now that we are a CDBG grantee, we are obligated to have policies that are consistent with a ruling from HUD. And I don't know if the ruling is the right word, but a requirement that we have to affirmatively further fair housing. So fair housing is not just affordable housing, but is also, for instance, if all of our high density and more low-income housing is all next to an industrial plant or in the area where everything is, where you're more likely to find contaminated soils, we're not affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so it's not just that we sort of don't stand in the way of it, but that we actively try to take down barriers to fair housing. And some of that is in the zoning world, and some of that is, you know, citywide in other policies and requirements. But it's something I think we need to start thinking more about, and evaluating any changes that happen with zoning and with planning at this level, and put that higher level of critique, you know, when we evaluate things, and really look at them with that lens and see if we are being compliant with that, because we need to defend what's happening in the city and in regards to affirmatively furthering fair housing. So
could we add that to number 2? That
Well, or
affirmatively?
if I could suggest, there's one here that, again, didn't make the top 13, but it's in the list of 35 action plans from the master plan. And it says, create a proactive plan for utilizing tools and tax incentives to support additional single and multifamily housing supply, including identifying available tax incentives, their purpose application, where special incentives are appropriate, criteria to approve or deny incentives, and metrics to quantify incentives' impact.
Does it say it's responsible for that?
That would be city administration and planning and zoning department.
It was one that was listed as indirectly actionable by us.
yeah.
Yeah, it's more city.
So, you know, I'm still kind of new here. I'm kind of trying to figure things out, but I do think that there's, you know, a scenario, a world in which the Planning Commission is a party to a bigger housing discussion and housing plan, and giving broad recommendations that then get sent to the City Commission and staff to implement. and that it all be not separate actions, but all be coordinated under a single plan. And that's where, from what I've been able to understand about the city, where I think there might be something lacking is, a housing policy and plan that will help make decisions citywide.
And coming at it from
yeah.
a land use perspective, as we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you're aware of was it last year or the year before, that there was some fairly in-depth exploration of possible uses of city-owned property for, affordable housing. And I think that was backburnered, but, there are pieces and parts that keeping our land use lens in place, maybe there's something there.
Well, you've really got me on the density bonus thing now. And I'm questioning whether I should either A, just every time we talk about rezoning something, propose a density bonus, or B,
Now,
if
that's
we-
contract zoning, which you can't do.
oh no, if we're gonna rezone these things, I'm gonna propose that we do the development district, we need number 10. I'm gonna say, hey.
Yeah,
we need to
if
have a
we
density
change-
bonus.
Yes.
Right,
But
so
just
every
to be
time we
clear,
look
if
at
someone
something-
requests a rezoning, you can't tie any conditions to it, like,
No, I'm gonna
we're
wanna
rezone this if you
rezone it and
do-
add density bonuses to I wanna amend the zoning at the same time.
Well, that's what we can't do.
And I guess my question is, maybe it'd be better instead, my other option would be that we simply look at creating a density bonus formula for the city, just as a draft, or run up the flagpole, see if the
Would-
city commission's interested in
Are you
it.
talking about citywide or as an overlay in existing commercial zones?
I'm thinking as mostly likely as an overlay and commercial, multiple family. I don't know, I don't know how much you can do it on. I mean, I'm saying R2 and up.
Yeah.
R1, I think you should look at everything. R1 should be looked at too, to see if it's possible, reasonable. But,
Yeah, but there's different zoning categories are not necessarily consistent in how a density bonus would be applied.
Probably not, but there could be some, I mean, I wouldn't want to create a new density bonus for every district. I'd want to have something that's, I mean, honestly, the residential, it'd have to be looked at. There's so many different options out there in the way it could be done, but other places do it, and they do it for different types of projects. The city used to allow well, it still does. We technically, if you have residential in a building, you get an extra floor. So that was always part of it. I don't know in many districts if a residential bonus, a density bonus would even help you when you're in our C4 districts, which are pretty much already being built out to the max.
Yeah.
So there's
Looking
probably
at-
not benefits there, but there may be in the multifamily districts and our development zones or some other districts that would allow us to maybe get a little more density.
Yeah, if we look at the history of number 8 here, that's because there's a density bonus for an extra floor of residential, but that hasn't resulted in more residential or even more redevelopment happening.
Shay wanted to say something.
I guess I'm curious, what do you need from us tonight?
Again, I'm new here, so I'm not sure how much we can do at a study session. I know we can't take any action, but it would be good to get a good, solid feel for what direction we're going in, bring it back to your next meeting. So what I have so far, just to bring it back and see where I might be off, is that sounds like there's support for, in every way, continuing with 1 and 3, which are short-term rental and riparian, kind of getting those pretty much to a place where you don't need to focus on it too much, maybe not fully approved, but where they can get moved on. And then some low-hanging fruit, which sounds like it might be 8 and 10. Maybe, was it also 7 as well? No, not 7.
Yeah, I thought it was
Nine.
8, 9, and 10, right?
Yeah.
8, 9, and 10.
But, so what we heard from you, Leslie, is this grant requires equitable housing, and then what we heard from others around here is affordable housing, and I would add, anything that helps us use the tools that the state of Michigan keeps handing down to help that happen. And I mean, maybe that can be tied into 10, maybe it can be tied into 2. However we want to write it, there just seems to be a will to explore that and make that happen somehow. I mean, we have to do it, the equitable side of it, and then there's the affordable. That kind of go hand in hand, you know what I mean?
The only other thing I would say is I do think that 4, 5, and 6 could be done together. Although 4 and 5 are like very closely related, the 6 is the last auto-centric one, and I think you just do cars, then we do all cars.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yep, 4, 5, and 6 go together.
But maybe
So-
not at the beginning.
Yeah,
Maybe
as a
what we-
backup,
Yeah.
if
Maybe
you
what
need.
we do now is kind of figure out what things can be lumped together. Then we can go back at staff level and figure out, if, take a closer look and see if we can actually do that at one time. And sort of come back to you and say, okay, sounds like we can do 1 and 3, then 4, 5, and 6, and then 8 and 9, and just see if that makes sense next time.
Well, I would say whatever needs to be lumped together to tackle that equitable, fair, affordable housing component. I mean, I know 2 speaks to R2, 10 speaks to 14th Street, but whatever can be lumped together to get us starting on that. You all agree with that? Yeah.
So anything housing related, sort of,
Equitable,
Lumping
affordable,
those
workforce,
together.
yeah.
because again, I do think it's part of a bigger discussion. It's hard, I think, to make some of those decisions unless you have a bigger policy that helps to guide you. So I would like to see a parallel effort that goes on that would be more of a housing policy, and then it will be clear, what zoning changes are supported under that. I think it would help to, reframe some of the discussions too that have become cumbersome.
Is that a planning commission or a city commission who writes the housing policy?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I mean, we don't typically handle policy. I think city does.
Yeah.
So whatever our part in that would be, that they would need from us.
I mean, I think there should be a seat at the table for the planning commission, but I don't know how that would get accomplished.
It'd be a great joint project.
Yeah,
Been a
I'd like
busy
to
couple of years.
reiterate support for 8 as something that was, among the various options, pretty high, and is something that, among these things, there was draft language that this is basically reiterating that was brought before the Planning Commission a couple years ago and didn't ultimately pass through the Planning Commission and City Commission, but if it's worth looking at again, it seems very low-hanging fruit if it's basically already written for us and we just need to run it up the flagpole again. 10, I see as, yes, it's the next up in our corridors master plan to look at 14th Street, but also 10, whether we're doing it as a D zone like this says, or just looking at that as a specific corridor and seeing what opportunities are there, also allows us to, focused on a specific area, look at a number of these other ones, whether it's number 6, number 7, number 11, number 12, maybe even number 13, could all play in some way to a re-examination of 14th Street and what the development is. So, not saying that by doing 10 we would handle all of those other 6 ones, but it could be a specific example tackling some lower hanging fruit that then provides guidance for how do we implement this throughout the city or through changes to underlying zoning.
Am I correct in assuming that 11 and 13 kind of go together
Mm-hmm.
and are kind of resource heavy? Like we might need to
Oh, they're-
hire someone?
Outside resource.
13
Yeah.
for sure would be.
Well, same for the pattern book too, right? Was that a,
I mean, it's, part of me says, at this point, we start getting too far down the road and making selections. By the time we get through 1 and 2, some of us won't even be here anymore. By the time you get through 4 or 5 of them, some of us likely to be dead. So,
Wow.
I'm just saying.
Are you saying something about your own health?
Yes, I'm just saying, yeah. I'm just saying, you know, so, or at least retired. I'm just saying is that it's, some of this stuff is just, it takes so long. I
Yeah.
don't want to start looking at things, unless it's a
I think
priority, we
for
focus on our
sure
priorities this year.
It would be good if you could, you know, by your next meeting, make a decision about what your goal is for the next couple of years, which things you want to get to, and, you know, then reevaluate after that, sort of loosely prioritize the rest or lump them together and prioritize, but that, you know, reality is these things are probably going to take a couple of years, and these will be your short list, and then you can come back and reevaluate. Because there might be new people in the planning commission, too.
But circumstances change also, so we talked about 10 here, which is the 14th Street, and when you were mentioning it, I was thinking, yeah, but we did the zoning after this huge, long public input process about reimagining 8th Street. We did this whole new redevelopment. That all came first, a reconstruction of 8th Street. That came before we redid the zoning. And so, you know, and then, so you start looking at creating a new district for that street, and does the city have plans to redo that street? And so how does that mesh? And is it best to do that up front, or maybe wait and see what that new street plan is going to look like before we kind of decide how we want the rest of it to look? Or do we decide how the rest of it, and the street design will have an impact on what the development will look like going forward. But on the other hand, somebody might come to us and say, yeah, we want to do this, and then our zoning's not in place. So,
Chicken or the egg.
yeah, so you run risks either way. I said, a lot of our time on the planning commission is, what we focus on isn't really determined by us. So,
Yeah. So.
but I will say 4, 5, and 6, I think is great, and because it's easy, because literally, we don't have to do anything for the first 3 or 4 or 5 months. It's all staff. We don't,
Brian.
none of us up here are electrical people. I don't know
I had
anything about
grouped
that
them in a
infrastructure.
different way.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, you know, it's all staff, and then when you get your proposals, you bring them to us, and we say, okay, sounds good. That's like 2 meetings for us. It's like a lot of work for the staff.
Could I make a request that these identified priorities, when you come back to us, has some sort of a description of the resources that you folks think are going to be required?
Sure.
Yeah,
Staff
good idea.
time, dollars, outside time, commission time.
But I want to get back to what I think we heard was 1 and 3, and whatever you want to throw together about housing. I mean, whether it's 10, whether it's, you know, I don't know. Do we have to stick to these exact things? Where does all the housing fit in there? Like, it could fit into 14th Street. It could fit into number 2. So I'd like to hear from staff where you think that fits in. Do people agree with that? Okay, great. And that's 3 one's in process, one we're about to talk about. And then that gives us the whole housing piece. And is that enough for now? That seems like a lot to me.
Plenty.
Yeah.
I think so too. And then you have the vehicles as a backup, because they are clearly like three altogether that you could just
And it's
throw.
coming. I mean, it's really
Debbie, I'm
coming.
sorry, what did you say? What was like your last, not that whole thing, but you said numbers.
Oh, 1,
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
And then whichever of these get lumped together in the housing discussion. So it could be 2, it could be 10, it could be the 14th Street one. Which one was that? Where's the 14th Street? 10. So it could be 2, it could be 10. It
And
could
maybe
be
Leslie's idea of housing policy
and
from
or
a land
housing
use.
policy and what's our role in that? Because I don't know what our role would be in that. And also, what is our role in that grant? Like that could be lumped into that too. You know, what does it mean for planning commission for fair housing?
87 could also be housing.
What?
7.
Yes, could be. And I think that sounds like a lot. I don't know what the rest of it. This sounds like a good amount of work. And I don't want to overtax the staff either, so.
I keep losing this one. The one with the hubs, is that
Number 12,
12?
yeah.
To me, that's a little bit of an outlier. I don't know if you all have a good sense of what that is.
I selfishly want that to be like our number one priority, because
I think it's really interesting, and
I think all along Garfield, there's opportunities at all those, like,
Yes.
all those, like, the intersections there,
Yeah.
all along Garfield
that
have
lumps in with 10.
huge opportunity.
And I saw it with the 14th Street one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
Right.
what you just said.
Yeah, I
because it's
think-
corridors.
I think
It's putting things out in the corridors.
Yeah,
It's
but
a
this
high
is more like, number 12 to me is like establishing what we would like to prioritize after 14th Street. That's how I read that. Like, we want to get, like, the way I read it is 14th Street has been talked about for a long time. Let's do something about it. What other ones do we want to do after that?
Or maybe we look at it and say, maybe 14th Street isn't the best one. Maybe it's East 8th Street or somewhere else.
Maybe it's 8th and Garfield. I mean, that would
Yeah.
only benefit me. But I think 14th Street is a good one to prioritize because,
But we've talked about Garfield, we've talked about East 8, so we've talked about the corridors.
Yeah.
So it's lumping the corridors into all of that too, when you talk about,
but I think again,
Housing.
if you lump them all together, they all become a priority and then none of them
Yeah.
are a priority. So I think working through 14th Street is a great idea.
Yeah.
Whether it's 14th Street, working through one of them is a great idea, but I don't think lumping them all in as one
or
is a great
examining
idea.
them just to see which one do we start with.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
feel like 14th Street has had lots of
Talked
eyes
about
on
it.
it for a long
Yeah, we
time.
talked
I don't know, like, I've only lived here for
It's-
36
it's-
years, and I feel like it's been talked about for 36 of them.
We
Yeah,
talked
it's-
about the corner of 14th and Division so many
Right.
times.
Yeah,
But what has changed?
not
Nothing.
much.
And part of it is, and I look at it as, 14th Street, the street itself,
Right.
is going to get rebuilt and redesigned.
It
I don't
has
know
to.
when. Does anyone know?
It's,
Soonish.
it's on the list, but it's really, it's just very, very expensive.
Yeah, it's gonna be
I think
a-
Alex said $20 million or something like that.
great.
$14 million.
Yes, well, a lot of things are on the list, but I mean, is it any other, I'm guessing they're not going to do anything for it right away.
I
And I
think
know
it's a
they
matter
talked
of
about-
finding the money
Money.
for it. It's just
You
very
know.
expensive.
So they talked about different types of things, TIF funds and things like that for it, but today anyone can opt out of a TIF, so there's not much funds other than, city general funds that would be captured by TIF if you created a development district for that stretch. So that was discussed a couple of years ago. I don't know if anything's changed or any new's come up, but, and there's a
there was
whole
something, too,
question
about the
about,
number of-
I don't know. So,
Maybe.
Is there, I know there's a list of streets that are on, like, the docket to be redone, and obviously they're all funding, but, like, is there a priority list in engineering that we could maybe look at that would help us?
I think so.
There should be.
I think
Yeah.
it's the one in the capital improvements. one.
Yeah.
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 So maybe we need to look at that.
For the bigger projects, just when funding's available.
Yeah.
So, just 14th Street, for instance, you think your work should come before or after or at the same time?
Brian threw them all out there.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know.
We
I
don't
mean,
know.
I know how we did it in the past. I don't know if that's the best or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, mean, part of it's like that, if the school decides to sell any of its property, I don't think they are. But I mean, if the school decides to sell any of that property along Thurlby Field, then, what happens with that?
Could us establishing a development zone incentivize them to sell it, do you think?
They don't seem to
Yeah,
care.
No.
they are exempt from zoning anyway, and the city made recommendations for the Montessori program that they were going to put at the Loomis, but then they decided ultimately that they didn't want to abide by the
What I'm
city's
saying is,
recommendations.
it might incentivize them to sell it because they get more buyers interested.
Right, because, once they sell it, it's no longer exempt.
Right.
But, it's possible. I don't think so. I haven't shown them show a lot of interest in anything along that line. In the past, I know the city's had conversations with them for years about it.
Yeah.
Doing something, selling just the front,
parking lot.
strip along
thing.
14th Street.
Plus, they are a board, just like this is a board, that doesn't all have one single thought between them.
Yeah, I don't know about
But
that.
that's why they're in the legacy project portion of the plan, just in case.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a question, it's worth looking at. I mean, but just because we start something and look at it, we may just decide the timing's not right and we move on. And then we won't know until we actually get into it.
So do you have enough from us, do you think?
Yeah, could you repeat all of that one more time? No, I think I have a better feel for it, and I think, we can go back now, bring you more information, and bring you some modules that we would recommend based on what we've talked about. Even though some of them might not be super high priority, if they're standalone, they don't have tentacles that impact other tasks and can be done pretty quickly, I do think those would be smart to get off the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then move on. Because some of these just have so many components that cross over into other tasks, and to do them without doing them comprehensively, I think would be a mistake, but trying to do them all at once would be untenable, so I'm not quite sure. It seems like maybe we need a little more input from Sean as well, because he's been involved with the master plan and the thinking from the beginning. This is, my interpretation, kind of, so.
Or you have enough to take back?
I think I do, yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions? Does anybody have public comment on this section of what we're discussing? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to the short-term rental discussion. Leslie?
So this one's really easy. It's really just that, there was the beginnings of a subcommittee appointed or created earlier this year. And I think the thinking now is it might make more sense to do it as a planning commission in the whole, because there's a lot, ideally, a subcommittee will do all the work, bring it back, and it almost gets rubber stamped at the planning commission level. But I think there's a lot of discussion that should be broader among the whole planning commission, and trying to have two subcommittees running at the same time is difficult. That's asking some of you to commit to more meetings, and for lots of reasons, we felt that it might be a better thing to bring to the full planning commission. One of the benefits of having the subcommittee was to have a seat at the table that are people who are very engrossed, engaged with short-term rentals, either as real estate real estate folks or those who own a short-term rental, somebody who manages them or lives next door to one that has a lot to say about them. It's always nice to have their voices and to kind of get their firsthand input. But there's nothing that says we can't bring them to the Planning Commission and have a discussion with them, especially during a study session, and get that information we need without appointing them to a subcommittee. So the question before you in general terms is, does it make sense for us to start working toward doing this at the Planning Commission as a whole instead of the subcommittee?
Well, I was drafted to be on the subcommittee, so I'm all in favor of this approach.
I was on it too. What does everyone else think?
I would be better prepared to offer an opinion on it once I saw sort of the overall work plan for the priorities that we've just identified. I mean, I don't know what we've asked of you already, and or what we have asked of ourselves, and so whether a entire commission approach to it versus a task force versus a subcommittee, it's kind of hard for me to answer that without seeing your thoughts on the whole body of work.
So I did put together a very loose work plan for this, and it does involve, getting some information together that we would do regardless, whether it's the subcommittee or the full Planning Commission. Maybe pre-digest some of it to make it a little bit easier to understand, but sort of give everybody the lay of the land, what's happened to date, how much we have of different categories of short-term rentals and what their status is, where they're located, what zoning districts are allowed in, not allowed in, grandfathered in. And, I think the discussion has to expand beyond just zoning, because there's a police power ordinance as well that regulates these. So I think there's a lot of information to share just to get everyone on the same page, and then, get a feel for where the comfort level is, whether it's with a cap or a change in zoning allowances in general, and what kind of impact that's going to have, again, on just keeping track of everything, and grandfathering of certain buildings or units, and measuring the potential impact of certain changes and how that will pan out. So I think it is heavy on our end, getting you information, but I don't think it's going to be hard to digest and move forward. But I think there will be a lot of work on our end.
With the same amount of work.
Yeah,
Is
I
there-
think, oh, go ahead.
Is there, I've seen this defined primarily as being a cap on short-term rentals. Is it likely that the conversation might explore other control mechanisms?
Oh, for sure. I think
Okay.
that's all in play.
Okay, thank you.
I think I love this plan. I think that this is really, I don't know what the right word is because it's the end of the day, but like, it feels not super attainable. Like, it does feel attainable, but it feels like that's a lot for you all. So, I love it. I'm in full support, and
Good luck.
good luck. Yeah, basically. But to me, it feels so easy for us because it's just one of those old business items that we're talking about at every other meeting or every meeting. That feels really attainable to me if it's in like bite-sized pieces like that, because I do think that what we've learned from STR conversations in the past is there's a lot, and there's a lot of opinion, And so taking it in bigger chunks could be more unattainable. And the last thing that I wanted to say is like, this is something that we heard so much at every single master plan listening session, and often erroneously. People have no idea that these are not allowed in residential districts. And this is something that I prioritize and I want to tackle because of that. Because people think that we're not doing enough, because people just don't know that they're not allowed, so they're not reporting, and they don't want to report their neighbors, even though we tell them to. That's the only way to solve this problem. So there are so many pieces to it that really require community engagement and everybody to pull through to make this successful, that if we don't start now, any time in the future is too late. We should have done this 2 years ago. So this is already too late. So I love it. I love it, and still, good luck, Leslie.
Jess, do you have a feeling whether you want it
You
to
mean
come
Katie.
before all of us?
I was ready to be on the committee, so
Yeah.
either way is fine with me.
Okay.
I just want to tackle it.
David, how do you feel?
Well, I think echoing a lot of what Anna said, you know, these were brought up throughout all the housing, the zoning, or the housing language and the master plan sessions. I think it's something we have to take up in some capacity. I too was ready to be on the subcommittee. I'm happy to. I think it's a lot for staff to digest. I can't answer whether it's too much for you guys or not, but I definitely think it's something we need to take up in some manner.
So I think I'm hearing that everybody's okay for it to come to the full board, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have your answer there. All right, Brian.
Just looking at the work plan you've got here, I had a couple comments on it. I think maybe, your first two things, month 1 or 2 is one, staff prepares presentation materials, including specific changes that might be considered. Maybe before we even get to that point, we just look at all the background information that you've gathered. That's a lot to digest just right then and there.
Yeah.
And then we may be able to better define what we're looking at.
And maybe bump up the engagement with subject matter experts or folks in the real estate field earlier in the process.
Yeah, I think it's people are going to respond kind of to what we're doing. So, but yeah, I mean, we can engage them. That's certainly, they have to be engaged. I mean, the people, so one thing we have to make clear is we're not talking about allowing short-term rentals in residential. It's not allowed. It's a complaint we hear all the time. Oh, it happens all the time. It's very difficult to enforce. We do what we can. Everything we do the max state law allows us. So I just like and we will hear people come up and complain about it. And we say, the city does everything it can, but it's not an easy thing to enforce. It's not easy at all. It's tough to prosecute. It's tough to get victories in court just because it's so difficult to prove. So I don't want to get down that road at all. I wouldn't spend a lot of time changes to state law or possible changes unless there's something pending. There's something always out there that's possible until the state actually does something. I don't think we can anticipate what the state legislature is ever going to do. So, I will tell you some information I'd like to see. I think it'd be important, and the assessor's got access to the MLS, and to track, we have properties that we did the 25% limit, and look at what those selling prices are on those units compared to the other units. They're always the first ones to sell, and they tend to sell for more money. So it'd be interesting to see on a percentage basis how that works. Because it's about, one of the issues with STRs is affordability. They take, they their ability to generate funds. So,
Brian,
Um,
do you remember when we did that?
yeah.
Like what year? Because I don't remember what year anymore, and
No,
I feel like
don't
it was
know.
like 4 years ago. I feel like it was a while ago.
Feels like I took my time off. I retired from the planning commission just yesterday. It was, what, in 21, so
Mitch,
3
did you have
years ago.
something you wanted to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That feels right.
Going off what Brian just said, as somebody that has now twice testified before the State House on short-term rental legislation, I don't think that it is this body's job to say what we think state law should be. I'd say the city commission can weigh in if there is specific pending legislation. But as far as us making recommendations on a planning level, it's not really our place. Yes, we have heard a lot of sentiment, not just in the master plan, not just in the residential zoning reform package that we passed last year, or was it 2 years ago? But in a lot of things that may or may not even be related to short-term rentals, it does repeatedly come up again and again. One thing that we could look at, but it might be a little late for, is much of the state legislation that I've seen has dealt with things that aren't really addressed in our zoning code, like the very nature of a condo hotel, which is defined in other community zoning codes, but we do not have it. We have regulations for hotels. We have regulations for multifamily housing, be it condos or apartments, but that has resulted in places where multifamily housing is allowed, but hotels are not. Then you have a condo complex get built, them all or mostly being permitted as short-term rentals, and it is functionally a hotel, but under a plethora of different owners, and it doesn't have a common front desk, but is in circumvention of our zoning code, and then because it has a bunch of owners, because it's might be built as discrete units with their own entrances, their own parking, their own waste receptacles, it is more difficult for the immediate neighbors to deal with than if it had been a single hotel. So it could be something to look at, whether we want to have zoning to say, hey, short-term rentals as a form of lodging are something that falls under our hotel and similar regulation.
It's an interesting approach. Just a term correction. A condo hotel
Yes.
does have a common desk.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it functions like a hotel, but they sell the individual units. But you're talking also about just a place with, condo hotels have a desk staff.
Yes.
So, and they limit usually the owner, how often you can actually stay in the units. So but in this case, I would think they would fall more under our terms as a hotel than a condo, as a hotel than as a condo. But you're right, there are condo developments that have been built that are strictly, all short-term rentals,
Like the
and they
Gillis-
function like a
Gillis
hotel.
Street is, I forget, 20 or some distinct buildings, but it's all functioning as one hotel under a different owner per unit.
But it sounds like this could be discussed in this
Yeah,
short-term
no,
rental.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good point, because they do act like hotels only in many ways, except they don't have one management company.
But the question before us was, should we have the short-term rental discussion as a whole board? And it sounds like we're yes.
Well, it's only 7:30, we want to get it started.
And we're really raring to talk about it. Okay, so we're going to move on to C now, which is housing resources. And I'm throwing that back to you, Leslie.
Yeah, so again, I think this is just kind of a heads up that we're going to start to send you lots of information, include information in your packets to help get everyone up to speed and at an equal place of understanding of information relating to housing. Housing has become such a huge issue, and we have a lot being thrown at us all the time. And, I think it is something, again, even if we don't end up with some kind of bigger, broader housing plan or policy, it's something I think we need to talk about and devote some time here and prior to taking on some of those zoning or those action items that might be related to housing, just to get everyone, again, to the same place of understanding and also to help get the public to understand what some of the newest issues are that have been coming before us, because it is kind of a shifting ground, and it's not just because of the real estate market and financial markets and other things at play. There are demographic shifts, and there's so much that is packed into this topic. So certainly don't expect any specific discussion today on any of this, but we wanted to start to put things in your packet. And if there's something specific that you run across that you want to share with everyone, just let us know. We can get it out to everyone. And I'm thinking maybe even we have some way of having a resource library that can be accessed, whether it's on the web page or some other way that you can get to everything, and also just use it as a resource when you're doing something else and you think, oh, I wonder how this document might relate to that, and you can click on it as a resource as opposed to just studying all of these things. So anyway,
That'll be coming.
I don't
your
think
way.
it's something for discussion now, but just wanted to start to warn you that more housing
And it's
info will be coming your way.
And it sounds like it's going to be more than one meeting.
And two things. One, we forgot to put that flywheel presentation on there. We meant to link to the video of that for anyone who wasn't able to attend that. And then also there's the housing summit. What's it? In
Yes.
October.
Yep.
That I did send out to you guys. If anyone wants to go to that, we pay for that.
I went last year. It was amazing.
I think I went a couple of years ago.
Very good.
And that's just here in town. It's at the Haggerty Center.
I'm just not going to be in town for it, unfortunately. Any other discussion on that we're going to have housing discussions coming to us in the future? Is there any public comment? Okay, thank you for being here, sir. So I think we're adjourned if there's no comments from anybody else. Thank you.
Or not.
Have that happen daily or not.
Well, I was a little distracted by the vacuum.